Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Walker. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, we have the kind of video that's being made for Hoyt. Like, obviously, everyone's recorded theirs, including Jerry, which makes you wonder, I guess she was back in town enough to record that and then go pick up Hoyt. Who knows, like, because the way her and Walker talk about it, I don't know if this is like their first time like actually being around each other. Maybe when she came back, like she avoided being around him, so we haven't had an opportunity to really talk about everything. He did try to leave a message for her, but obviously her voicemail was full at the time. So it's a complicated thing because even to the point he can't focus on the video like he's supposed to be making for Hoyt because he's feeling guilty. It's like, man, this is my best friend's girl. This is a good friend of mine, a good friend of my wife's, and it's like we kiss, and it's been going through his mind because for him it's like, was it just a kiss? Did it mean something more? Was it just like we were in a vulnerable place, or was there more to it? And obviously, there, you can tell it's affecting Jerry in many different ways. I think she's always been complicated, like her relationship with Hoyt, him just constantly kind of being the troublemaker that he is, but also this kiss with Walker, I think, changed a lot for her. So, when the time comes, they're celebrating his return and everything, and obviously, it's got her thinking about a lot. For her, it's like, Hoyt's kind of made all these promises, like obviously those little things he make of like, oh yeah, like I'm going to marry you, and now it's kind of making her think, maybe like kind of being with him isn't the right thing. She's kind of looking at Walker because it's got her thinking. And when they do get close enough, for him, he's like, I tried to reach out to you, but for her, he's like, yeah, but like I was dealing with a lot. I've got my hearing coming up. And so for her, she thinks probably in her mind like, oh, you've already settled how you feel about it, which isn't the case. Even Walker's like, still, like, I think he solidified a little bit more that maybe at least he wanted to talk about it, but like Jerry was just kind of like, she had to figure things out on her own, but she's like, oh, I guess you just figured it out, so it's okay. Like, I think she just assumed like everything was kind of copacetic, that he had kind of figured out his feelings about it, that although there was nothing more to it, hence why he didn't really contact her. But it's also because, he was trying to handle it in his own way. To be fair, we've seen that Walker isn't the smoothest when it comes to ladies. That teacher that was kind of hitting on him, and they kind of had a moment and stuff like that. But obviously Hoyt, telling Jerry like, oh, like you're my girl, and obviously, he's happy to kind of make a change in his life with her by his side. Because obviously Walker was talking about like, we'll tell him to. Well, it was more so Jerry being like, we need to tell Hoyt the truth, and it's like we'll do it together. But she wanted to do it now. It's like he's like, he just got back home, and you want to do it now, like celebrating literally everyone around. That's not going to cause issues. He doesn't say that, but I'm thinking that. But things get complicated when it turns out Clint and Jackson end up escaping the bus transporting them. There was a biker gang. I guess it was just bikers. I was wondering, like, I immediately was like, oh, is it North Side? They never make that connection, so, like, they never said that specifically, so I guess it was just some random biker gang. And obviously, Walker knows them well enough because of his days with them, so he knows, like, there's a particular bank. It was supposed to be the next place they hit, but it's also where they left Crystal's necklace, and it's obviously the last thing he had. Well, for one, Walker immediately took it as, like, well, something valuable he could sell to get the money needed to disappear. Probably didn't cross his mind to really think, like, yeah, despite Clint being who he is, he did love Crystal, and so it might be him getting something that he's sympathetic about. And so it's like the back and forth about whether he's right or not. And it seems like he's wrong, but then they get back there, and it turns out Clint had already came and left a note. And obviously they're trying to figure out, like, what his plan is. So they go to the one person that would know anything, Twyla, which I wonder how long it was before Twyla found out about. It's like, I think what she was referencing wasn't... At first I was wondering if she was referencing when it's like, he was like, oh, so I'm sure you heard it. And it's like, at first I thought there was a reference of like, oh, when did she find out about Walker? Like, was it in this moment before she came into the room? Like, when did she find out about it? Like, did word get back to her from like Jackson and Clint about it? Who knows? But it's probably more so like, it was definitely about like, no, like Clint and Jackson making their escape. And obviously for Twyla, she feels betrayed because she's like, was anything between us real? And he's like, before, like, just a little bit of information in exchange for truth. And it's like, I lost my wife a little before we met, and she was like, my condolences. And for him, you were right for me then. And she's like, oh yeah, like she's like almost like it's a backhanded compliment, like, oh, you're beautiful to me. Because for Walker, it's like you're who I needed at that time. Because truth be told, he needed something to kind of fill that hole in his heart. Like obviously that's why he jumped on his job and why Twyla got, but for Twyla, it's like my husband left me, put me in debt. I was only with this group so I can get the money to kind of like pay that off and start fresh. Which it's a theme in this episode, starting fresh. And also, but for her, it's like they were her family. But it's like, if it wasn't me, and I think that's something everyone's not getting across. If it wasn't Walker, someone else was going to inject themselves in that group and take it down. If it wasn't Walker, it would have been some other undercover cop. So, I mean, if it wasn't for Walker, Twyla wouldn't have gotten away with, like, not getting taken down with the rest of them. So, and if August hadn't gone digging, he wouldn't have contacted her and kind of set a lot of stuff in motion. So that has to be considered as well. But Walker's kind of biting his, like, because it's interesting because Mickey's kind of worried about him kind of becoming Duke again. Is I don't go full blown Duke, and regardless of him trying to burn that, like, that past is still there. The time he spent with Twyla was there, so it's like, yeah, that was Duke, but regardless of me being undercover, there was still a little bit of Walker there as well. So he does feel something for Twyla. So it's like, it's like, yeah, they left you, they didn't let you know. And she's like, well, I guess they felt like I wasn't necessary. She's like, all the men in my life just kind of come to me and use me when they need something. And she's like, Walker's promising, like, he'll come visit her, and she's like, why should I believe you? He's like, because I promise you and I'll keep my word. Like, not because I'll need something from you, but just to check on you from time to time, because he does care about Twyla. Because she was a part of kind of, I think, pulling him out of the dark space he was in at the time, losing Emily. So she ends up giving him information about, like, one of the places, and it turns out that's the place Stella and Trevor are staying at. But obviously Mickey brings him the information, like, yeah, look who's been visiting Clint the entire time. Trevor, wait, his son? What? And it's like, now he's thinking, like, Stella's in danger. Because now for him, it's like, what if the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree? Couldn't get that analogy out. Jeez. But it's the sad thing, because even Mickey was like, yeah, but, like, when it came to Northside, like, he protected her. But for him, it's like, maybe he could flip on the dime and kind of, like, have a little bit, like emotional issues like his dad, where he can just kind of flip into anger out of nowhere. So he's kind of worried, because for him, it's like, he doesn't know how deep Stella is into this. I mean, he doesn't even find out until, like, he gets to the house later on when he sees her back. It's like, no, she was going to run away with him, Once again, very Romeo and Juliet, because obviously for Stella, she's going to miss the game, but it's like, nah, they'll be fine. They'll handle things without me. But obviously Trevor's kind of got the idea of, like, yeah, let's get some money, and then we're going to go off as far as we can. But Stella was like, she's like, I thought we're just going to take a break from everything and then, like, find our way back. But Trevor has no plans of going back, because it's like, yeah, the only thing there for me is my dad. Like, that's all that's waiting for me. But for Stella, it's like, August needs me, because it's like, I don't want to be like, he's finally maybe okay for the first time in a long time, and it's like, our family is kind of piecing itself back together despite everything, and it's like, I don't want to be the reason that all falls apart again. So now they're kind of in this impasse, because Trevor doesn't want to go back. He ends up, like, there's money his dad has stashed away. It could be their means of getting as far away, kind of starting fresh in their own right. And so obviously, Stella's had this nightmare of Trevor shooting a gun. Who was he shooting at? We don't know. I don't think it was like he's shooting me, but just like he's shooting somebody. Could be very foreshadowing. But for her, it's like, let's just go back home, like, saying, like, my dad, like, he can help you, like, but Trevor's reluctant to trust him, because it's like, your dad, if he had never gone undercover, my mom would still be alive. First and foremost, the fact of the matter is, he's only got one side of the story. The fact of the matter is, his dad's going to spin in a certain way, but it's like, your mom got shot not because of Walker. Well, maybe the argument is that, like, maybe the guards or whatever were prepared because Walker let them know ahead of time. But he's also the one that was like, let's get out of here. But your dad was all cowboyish and wanted to kind of stay behind. It's like, and, like, Crystal was willing to, like, no, I'm good. She even died trying to hide the money, for him. So I think that in itself should speak volumes. But to be fair, Trevor doesn't have the full story. His dad's only going to tell the perspective that makes him look like the victim in this situation. I mean, especially in Trevor's mind, because he's like, my family was on their way to piecing themselves back together. The fact is, like, that was going to be the last job, and your dad ruined that. It's like, it's interesting, because it's like, because regardless of anything, they're his parents, but it's still a thing of like, your parents were robbing and they were hurting people, and it was going, and that's also what Walker explained in Twilight. It's like, regardless of them being your family, and you were going to get out of all that, but it's like, regardless of what you wanted, that it was escalating more and more, and people would have gotten hurt. People did get hurt, you know? So that's also the thing behind it, where it's like, you know, he makes it seem like his family was kind of, it's like they were up to some shady stuff, but for him it's like, regardless of that, like, I should still have my mom and my dad in my, well, at the very least I should have my mom in my life. Maybe my dad wouldn't be who he is, because he did tell that story early on that, like, that lake nearby where they're staying is where his mom taught him to swim, mainly because he needed swimming lessons after his dad was just kind of an asshole and threw him into the lake. I guess it's kind of like a, you'll learn by just swimming, or either his dad just had his mood swing and just got so pissed that Trevor just threw him in the water. So, but obviously for Stella, it's like, you're saying all that, but at the very least, my dad is trying to do better. Can you say the same thing about yours? And obviously it's a thing that they both love each other, but for him it's like, you know, that's what makes it so hard. And he kind of leaves, but he ultimately comes back and, you know, both of them kind of apologizing. You know, she's like, I didn't even think about how you would feel about all this. And he was like, no, it's kind of on me. So they end up burning the money, because for him it's like, you know, we won't go down there. I'm curious what he would have done. Like, would he have gone to Walker? Like, would he have gone back home with her? So there's that element to it. And so ultimately Jackson shows up there with Clint. We didn't see Clint, but we definitely saw Jackson. And by the time Walker and Mickey get there, she's on the run. Stella's on the run from Jackson. And Walker's in the woods, and Stella accidentally shoots him. Goes into a toe-to-toe fight with Jackson. Can't really swing his other arm around because of the gunshot wounds. It's just a scratch, but still handling himself pretty well. Mickey getting him in a chokehold and then tripping him. So, you know, so everything's kind of resolved in that moment. But obviously Stella's asking, like, what, you think Clint's going to hurt Trevor? It's like, no, of course he wouldn't hurt his son. It's like, yeah, but he sent a gang of guys to beat him up. And it's like, well, yes, but at the end of the day, you can't underestimate the love between a father and their child, you know? And now obviously there's a conversation between Walker and Stella. It's like, why did you lie to me? She's like, oh, you've lied about things. He's like, this is different. You could have gotten hurt or worse. Like, you know, why didn't you say anything? Because for her, it's like, after seeing Trevor get beat up like that, she wanted to do what she could to save him, because she's like, I wanted to kind of get away from almost sounded like she was kind of implying, like, I want to get away from everything, because it's not just Clint she blames. She does blame her dad on some level, on some part, for being responsible for things turning out the way they did. And, like, it seemed like she was almost about to go there, but she stopped herself, and Walker kind of knew, like, where she was going with it, so he's just like, get in the car, Stella, you know? So, you know, but obviously on the way there, it's like, you know, he talks a little bit about, like, yeah, like, after your mom died, and she's like, I know, I remember, Dad, like, what kind of dark place he was in. So she kind of he's trying to make her understand, like, why I got involved in this case in the first place. I needed to kind of find my way through the pain and stuff like that. I think is what he was kind of getting at. And so during it, the conversation comes up about her being like, do you want to just take a trip this summer? And it's like, yeah, your mom was going to plan that for your summer, before your senior year. And it was like, yeah, but, you know, we never worked it out. And he was like, that was supposed to be like a mother-daughter trip. Is it really okay for me to go? She's like, yeah, you know, so I thought that was kind of nice. Other elements we'll get to as we kind of weave everything together. Obviously, there's a little bit more about Trey's condition. I'm worried about, like, you know, because obviously it's a situation where, like, you know, she says that, you know, Trey's always very reliable, always has been, especially considering, like, you know, everything going on with her mom, everything that happened during the storm. He continues to prove himself to be reliable, but now he's worried, like, what if, like, his condition kind of gets worse and, like, I'm no longer reliable. And she's like, didn't rely on me, you know? It's like, the kid's gloves off, like, from now on, let's just kind of be 100% honest with each other. And so he talks to Mickey later on about, like, yeah, he was driving himself home, but, like, Belle and August ended up driving him home because he ended up, which I think that speaks volumes, because it's like, once again, it's like, there's hints to that becoming a thing. Obviously, like, it seems like Ruby might have a thing for, August, but it still hasn't been clear whether or not, like, it seems like there might be a little bit of a love triangle there thing, complicated thing. I mean, to be fair, Ruby is in a relationship, but also it's like, it does seem like Belle and August kind of hit it off. We'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. But like some of the past episodes kind of hinted to that. But along with all that, it was just nice, kind of like them kind of opening up about Stella and not Stella, but Mickey and Trey about his circumstances. I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front, like as he deals with that, what kind of effects that will have. I mean, Mickey did bring it up, but it's also like, right, there's everything with her mom, both like, well, her aunt and her actual biological mom, and that's something she still hasn't dealt with. So Walker's dealing with family stuff, and Mickey still hasn't really felt comfortable enough to dive into that. To be fair, it's an entire life kind of upheavaling, so it's like you're not really quick to want to jump back into dealing with all that, so. But another angle to this episode I thought was kind of interesting is the whole, well, for one, obviously, Hoyt hanging out around with Abby, it's so interesting, like, how different she can kind of become. Like, she was kind of a little drunk having fun because, I mean, Hoyt is kind of like the extremely fun son that she loves to hang out with and stuff like that. I guess because our other boys are a little too very serious. I think probably in her mind is probably, they take after their dad a little too much in that regard. But they kind of interrupt Liam as he's kind of doing stuff for him running for DA and stuff like that. I was like, that's kind of messed up, Mom. You're supposed to be, like, helping me out. You're kind of hindering this a little bit by bringing Hoyt around. You're both kind of a little drunk, and it's like no. But that kind of comes back to kind of bite him in the ass a little bit because the journalist in particular. Well, it's not just that. I was thinking that caused complications when it's like, when it's hinting like, Hoyt's been in jail. It's like, you have connections to a convict. I thought that was where things were going to go, but it turns out the journalist did his due diligence and found some of the stuff in his family situation. That being Cordell's hearing that's coming up and Stella's record, which obviously Abby was like, kind of go to the forefront. Like, you basically control the narrative by you coming forward with it without it kind of being used to hinder you. You come out front. But obviously later on we hear him reading it. He's like, reading the comments. And Abby's like, don't read the comments. So it's like, right, I think things have kind of skewed against him. It's like trying to get out front. I'm sure there's going to be some people that's like, okay, I respect the fact that you're not hiding from this. Or maybe still people who are like, you came out now, but that's only because of blah, X, Y, and Z, or why you're coming out now about it. Because that eventually would come out that maybe someone else had already dug it. Maybe it's that. Or maybe it's just like, some people are like, hey, I appreciate it. Maybe other people just don't. We never found out like necessarily what those comments were. So the way he was reacting definitely didn't seem positive. So, but another angle to this is Hoyt trying to figure out the whole Jerry thing. And obviously he thinks like, no, Jerry deserves more than me. She always has. And so for him, he wants to kind of show her that he's changed. Obviously, he wants to spend the rest of his life with her. So when the time comes, like, Abby ended up giving him her ring, and it's like, he's like, whoa, because apparently, and this was interesting information, before her and Bonham got together, like, in fact, when they met, is actually what caused her to call off her engagement. It's like, you were engaged before you met their dad? That's interesting. And it's like, it's like, you be doing me and Bonham a favor by getting this out of the house, because she kept the ring this entire time. But it's like, go give it to Jerry. And he does this beautiful thing where he's got like all the like rings he ever like made for her that she collected all the time, and he made into a giant heart, gets in the middle of it. I want to marry you. And she feels it, and I'm like, are you going to bring up the whole you and... I didn't know whether she was going to go like, me and Walker kiss, or is it going to be a thing of, okay, yes, like just to kind of ignore it, and that'd probably eat away at her. But ultimately what ends up happening is she's like, I can't marry you just because she ends up bringing up me and Cordell kiss. It's like, the one time? She's like, yes, the one time. And it's like, well, he's like, I'm in a forgiving mood. I can move past that. But not unless it meant something more to you. And she's like, no, of course not. And she's like, well, I don't know. And for her, it's like, it should mean more. You should mean more. This should mean more. The fact is for her that it's like, the fact is I'm not immediately jumping at this and saying yes, that this isn't filling my heart. Like, the fact is that your love isn't reaching me like that. That speaks volume that maybe, you're trying to change, and I love that, but I'm trying to change too, and maybe we're just not the right people for each other. And sadly, Hoyt's not too happy about that. So I was like, okay, so when did you guys kiss? A month ago after Emily's killer. And it's like, a month ago, and neither one of you told me about this. And obviously he tells the Geraldine, it's like, every time I proposed to you, you took it as a joke. He's like, that should have been my key sign of how you really felt. That every time I was doing it, you thought it was like, oh, just me joking around. It's like, I was serious as a heart attack every single time. But the fact is that you took it as a joke should have been a sign. So, like, that's kind of falling apart. Because not only where they stand's complicated, where she stands with Walker, Walker and him are about to have an issue because he shows up at Abby's, be like, oh, where's Walker? And it's like, oh, he's on his way home. And it's like, oh, it's so interesting because, like, Stella just threw it in his face of, like, right, you got these secrets. And it's like, oh, he does have this big secret, right? He kills Jerry. And it's like, what's that? Like, obviously there's going to be issue between him and Hoyt, but also it's like, that's going to get brought up in front of probably Stella and August, or maybe just Stella, but it's like, how she's going to feel it. Because there was a whole conversation about first loves, it's like, I get it, you loved it, no, you love him, and what that necessarily means in the grand scheme of things, it's like that first love always kind of pulls you down the most, and obviously it means that much to you, obviously, and she's like, yeah, that's why, I guess that explains, like, why it hurts so much now, but finding out, like, it's like, I don't know how she would feel about her dad, like, her dad in general, because in her mind, it might be like, mom's been gone a year. Like, I think that's a different conversation for different people of, like, how long, on a personal level about your kids, how they feel about you moving on. Like, are Stella and August happy for you to move on? And, like, it's like, as long as you're happy, they're happy. Or, and it being Jerry, does that complicate things? Especially because it's like, oh, this is more secrets, and now their secrets are breaking this family apart. Like, it might lead to Stella and August resenting him because it's like, oh, you kept this a secret, and you made out with Jerry. It was like, yeah, it was a kiss, but still, it's like, regardless of anything, all your judgments and everything, and you do something shady like this, you're hurting Hoyt, you're kind of breaking this family up to a certain extent. I don't know. I'm really curious to see how they'll react. But we also had the ending where we have, because the whole thing is like, Trevor's supposed to be with his dad. We only saw Clint in the front. Like, I don't know whether Trevor was knocked out in the back or something, or maybe he was there in the front. I didn't see, but I'm curious if that's supposed to represent Clint being like, oh, he wanted a fresh start with his son, but it's like, nah, before I get my fresh start, I need to put Walker in the ground where my wife, my crystal is, So it's like, we'll see how that ultimately ends up playing. I'm curious to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.